I'd be remiss if I didn't mention your connection with the Foo Fighters. So you got to tell us about that.
Sure. So, in these, I have many wonderful, interesting patients, and it's always fun to help them along and then get to know them in the process. And Dave had injured himself, and I picked up his care actually once he came back to the States, and we developed a nice friendship, and we're still in touch. And I went to see him and taking care of him post-operatively, and he said, "Hey, what are you doing tomorrow?" And I was like, "Oh, I'm going home. I've got surgery on Monday. It was Saturday night at midnight. I'm going to go home Sunday." He said, "Well, why don't you stay and perform?" And I'm like, "Well, that's really very nice, but no, thank you." I really didn't think that performing in Fenway in front of over 35,000 people was a great idea. I mean, I have a rock and roll band, have had it since 1998, and we do play songs, but we're on a little different scale than the Foo Fighters. But he insisted that I do it. I kept refusing, and finally he said he's not taking no for an answer. What songs do? I list these great songs that I actually do, and he nixes them all. And I'm like, okay, now we got something weird happening. He asked me to do it, and he's nixing my songs. And it wasn't like I was doing Frank Sinatra. I was doing some really good stuff. And he said, "Well, do you do anything Boston or Fenway?" And I'm like, obviously he thinks like I've got this catalog of thousands of songs that I could just pick a few from the Boston category. And I did, but none that I would sing. And then I realized I did Seven Nation Army with my band, the Stimulators. And I said, "Well, that's a stadium song." And he goes, "Oh, that's great." So the next day, at around 7:45, curtain time was 8:00. He called me. He says, "Oh, okay, we're going to rehearse." Up until that point, there was no rehearsal. I didn't know what key they were going to do. I was going to play the keyboards, but I hadn't really played with their keys. Now, there's different keyboards, so you don't want to just show up and start figuring out the keyboard. So I said, okay, I'm not going to play the keyboard. It was, 0 hour, and Rami Jaffe was playing the keyboards from the Wallflower. So I was like, we've got this covered. I think we're going to be fine. So I did it. We did it once, and then we did a start and stop, kind of the beginning and end of it, and then we did it during the show. And he introduced the band and then brought me out. It was a lot of fun and a great experience. And then, as you know, 3 years later, I had a little return engagement in Fenway. And so we did the Ramones Blitzkrieg Bop, which was a lot of fun.
And certainly it sounds like in terms of all the abilities you've mentioned, and your family background, the creativity, arts, crafts, and so forth, it's very clear that impacted you in your ability to do the innovative work that you have to be a creative person to do that. I mean, there's not too many people who innovate who aren't creative. So, you've taken those skills and applied them in ways that help many, many people. So that's fantastic.
Thank you. Yeah, the humanities are always looked upon a little bit askance as soft fields by the scientific community, but most doctors know the importance of the humanities, not just to learn about the world, but to learn about people and to develop creative processes. Like writing, critical thinking, and arts and crafts as well. So I think it's always important that we take our scientists and mix them up with the non-scientists and vice versa. I think it's a very healthy thing to do.
Let's get back to you, Dr. Serrato. You're originally from West Milford, New Jersey. Is that correct? Okay, so how'd the Jersey girl end up in Baltimore?
I followed my heart. So yes, I was in Chicago halfway through my orthopedic residency, and my spouse at that time took a job with I guess at that point, the Washington Redskins. And, for a little while there, I thought I'd just finish my residency in Chicago. But we had already started a family, and he was succeeding in DC. So I actually transferred from Chicago to DC. So I was at Georgetown, and that's where I finished my residency. And then I got interested in doing foot and ankle for my subspecialty and fellowship. And I was fortunate enough to be able to come to Baltimore I actually completed my fellowship here at Mercy. And it was a life-changing experience for me. And so when I had the opportunity to stay with, my partners and stay at Mercy, it was an easy answer for me. So, but it's not that far from Jersey, so I get up there very often.
Now, you mentioned your husband, Vinnie Cerrato, his connection with the Washington Club. And
The Commanders.
The Commanders now. And I also understand he was an executive with the San Francisco 49ers at one point. But Baltimoreans may know his work best from his work on radio, 105.7 The Fan. But would you say that you think your husband's ultimate accomplishment remains his role as Sergeant Antonelli in the 1994 film Kindergarten Ninja?
That poor guy. Yeah, so when he was in San Francisco with the 49ers, some of the trainers at the facility were involved in movie making. In fact, the owner of the 49ers' daughter was a film producer. And so one of the trainers actually filmed and recruited some of the players, including Dwight Clark, who was, as you guys know, from The Catch. So Dwight Clark was in it, and so was my husband. And so you could Google and see some very interesting pictures.
I did. I did my research.
Yes,
so,
you
yes, that was very interesting. So, yeah, well, like you were saying, you never know where certain skills may come into play, and someone might see that and wind up offering a part someplace else or lead to who knows what. So, the only way you can do that is to try. Now, does Vinnie occasionally ask you to come on his show to discuss foot ankle issues for athletes, obviously?
He has. I remember when, I've a couple of them, when Suggs tore his Achilles, numerous times, and he'll call it the most inconvenient moments. I mean, I could be operating because he wants somebody on then. If he's live on the radio and it came out that, it's a complete tear of the Achilles, he wants somebody on. In fact, my partner, John Campbell, went on one time to talk about, I think it was an ankle fracture, and I can't remember the player, because I was like literally in the middle of operating on a patient. I'm like, I do not have the time right now to talk about this injury with you. Yeah.
Well, we'll take one more break, and then we'll be back for the last segment of Medoscopy.
Bunion is a term that we use when a patient has a deformity at the big toe joint. And everybody thinks it's a growth on the inside part of the bone here, but it actually isn't. Normally, it's just the fact that the big toe is drifting over, and it makes what normally is there more prominent.
I never complained about my feet until maybe 3 years ago, and then it just progressively got worse. And that's when I knew that it was something that I would have to look into a little bit more.
Many patients actually have pain even with weight bearing without shoes. But I think the biggest problem that they can have with bunions is the pain that they experience when it rubs inside shoes. The two ways you could describe this is a percutaneous bunion correction or minimally invasive bunion correction. So we're able to obtain the results we had before, but we're able to do it in far less pain, particularly in the first 6 to 8 weeks, far less scars around their foot, which is an advantage not only from a cosmetic standpoint, but from a functional standpoint as well.
With Dr. Serrato and explaining to me this procedure and the degree in which my bunion was, I was able to be more comfortable making that decision. This was an outpatient surgery. It was pretty simple, and I'm really happy that I got it done, and I'm excited and comfortable back in my regular shoes. Don't be afraid to fix something. If something is ailing you, there's really no reason why you should continue to be in pain.
And we're back with Mercy orthopedic surgeons, Doctors Rebecca Cerrato and Lew Schon of Mercy's Institute for Foot and Ankle Reconstruction. As our viewers know, one of the regular features of our program is a sort of show and tell where guests bring in something, some item, could be a book or a photograph, who knows what. But it is in some way important to them, symbolic of who they are, what they're about. Dr. Schon, we're going to start with you. So I'm curious
Sure.
about this.
So,
What have you brought for us today?
This is just your basic ram's horn. We call it the shofar. And in my faith, this is blown at the beginning of the new year. And since I came from a musical family, when I was 11, I learned how to do this, and I did it for my congregation, the junior congregation at first, and as I got older, I do it for my adult congregation. So this is the ram's horn, and it represents my passion for people, for religion, for spirituality, and for history, so ancient tradition. So this was the first cell phone.
I was going to say, any longer, we would have had to call pulmonary. So
You could just fade out, fade back in, run the clock. Actually, I haven't been practicing. I blew it for the first time in 9 months in the car.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Wow.
baby fright, yeah. You have to do that. You have to do 100 blows during the service, and everybody stands up. It's a very solemn event. So you're all standing and kind of meditating and thinking about the year and the year to come and your family and the community and the world. And, you know, it's a kind of a peak spiritual moment. And then I have to be there and do this, but I can't get myself in the way. I need to, you know, make the sounds help people to, you know, elevate themselves and get into a different space. And I have to be, you know, confident and comfortable and not consumed in what's happening so much as what's happening with me and the horn and, you know, the spirituality of the moment.
Dr. Serrado.
Well, I brought one of multiple objects that I could find that probably symbolizes not just myself, but my family, I think, at this point, and a large part of our life and has been our life for years. So probably around here, everybody thinks, and I think some people assume that this was a lacrosse helmet, which it is not. Yes, we are in Baltimore, but this is actually a hockey helmet. And why a hockey helmet? Well, probably because I'm in ice rinks every weekend of my life and have been for many years. My husband, despite the fact that his professional background is in football, he was born in New York, but raised in Minnesota. And most of his family's there. And hockey is part of their life. And it has become part of my boy's life, particularly one of my boys. But it's not even just hockey. I think, as we had talked about with Lew and his family and their passion with music, I think it's very obvious in my family, probably our biggest passion is sports, athleticism, team, and you know, it has become just such a fabric of our family. And all of us see success in it in different ways. As you know, you guys have, you know, we've talked about with my husband, it's become not just something he played in college, but a career that he's made, and it has transcended into different things, including sports radio and stuff like that. I have, you know, both my boys played both football, but hockey. I have one that's currently in Michigan right now playing for the U.S. National Development Team with hopes of playing at a professional level. And my poor daughter is left at home with a father that's pretty intense. And so she's not interested in hockey, but is very passionate about sports, particularly soccer and track and field. And she's probably, I hope they don't see this, probably the most talented of the three of them. But it's a way that we've always stayed together, support each other. We've seen ups and downs in both of those, and I've been able to witness all of my children really just grow from any one of those experiences, both the good and the bad. And I think it's definitely shaped them even outside the realm of their, you know, athletic ability and stuff like that in other ways. It's allowed them to become more independent, more confident, they're good skills to learn with that on as far as team building elsewhere, time management. And it really has just been such an enjoyable part of our life. If you had asked me when they were little that this would be something I do all the time, I'd probably think that was kind of silly. But I couldn't imagine us not being in an ice rink or a soccer field every weekend, every year.
Well, as co-founder of the Chesapeake Fencing Club here in Baltimore, I have to ask, any of them ever interested in the sport of fencing?
No, none of them have done that. At this point, I definitely noticed it because when I was growing up, my sister and myself were very team sport oriented. Whereas my brother, who did swimming and fencing, really, and cross country, he had that individual sort of, I always say, like, I just didn't have the drive if it was myself doing it. Whereas if I was interacting and working with a team, that's where I excelled when it came to athletic and also my interests. And all three of my kids seem to be in that realm. So we don't have any fencers or cross-country runners, or even swimmers for that matter.
Dr. Serrato and Schon, thank you both for your time and your candor. I'm hoping our viewers enjoyed this chance to hear your stories, learn about some important topics, and thank you for watching. On behalf of myself, our guests, the Mercy staff, and the Sisters of Mercy, we wish you good health and humor. And until we meet again, may the road rise up to meet you. Okay, this is our Wait, Doctor, I Forgot to Ask segment. This is where I want you to let me know, what's that question, maybe an interesting question a patient has asked you that you weren't expecting, or what's the question you wish they would ask you?
Yeah, so pain and suffering usually leads to a patient's desire to see us and have a surgery. In addition, sometimes they'll have a deformity, so pain, suffering, disability, deformity. And sometimes they're encouraged to come because a spouse or loved one, community member says, oh, you got to have that checked out. That looks horrible. And sometimes the patient forgets to ask, well, what if I don't do it now? Is it going to be too hard to fix later? And that's a complicated question, but most of the time, we would have that discussion. If it's a tendon rupture, it's just going to keep collapsing. If it's a progressive slow deformity, then perhaps you can put it off because we have more extreme procedures that we can do to address those and even still spare the joints and spare the normal mechanics of the foot and ankle.
I would think, because in foot and ankle, as we can speak, we do over probably 800 different types of surgeries. So to kind of group it all together, I think a lot of my patients, they spend a lot of time doing research on their problem, and maybe they're very well prepared to ask you, doctor, how many of these have you done? What are the risks? All that stuff. But very few people think about what involves not walking on a foot. It's not easy. And so we try to prepare these patients before surgery. We have a lot of literature to give them and stuff. They don't even think about it, particularly if it's their right foot. They don't even think that they may not be driving for sometimes up to 2 months. So I think some of the just logistics of going through a foot or ankle procedure, I think if a lot of them forget to ask those questions, and it's going to impact their experience in those first 2 months. Like, don't wear skinny jeans on the day you come to surgery because you're likely not going to be able to get them over that splint.
Very good. Thank you again, both of you.